President Donald Trump posts a message on Truth Social that sends oil prices crashing 15% in a single session, the biggest drop since 2020. The United States and Iran have agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. Within minutes, traders dump crude contracts, stock futures surge across Asia and Europe, and headlines around the world declare that the 6-week war is finally pausing. The Strait of Hormuz, the choke point that carries 20% of the world's oil supply, is supposed to reopen. The missiles are supposed to stop. And for approximately 12 hours, the world believes it. Then Israel launches Operation Eternal Darkness. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how this ceasefire collapsed before the ink was dry. I'll walk you through the 3 specific violations Iran is accusing the United States of committing, the 254 people killed in Lebanon within hours of the truce announcement, and the reason the Strait of Hormuz is now functionally closed again, despite both sides claiming the deal is still alive, because the mainstream media spent Wednesday celebrating peace. What actually happened on Wednesday was the single deadliest day of the Lebanon war, a diplomatic framework that contradicts itself on its most critical clause, and an oil market that gained and lost tens of billions of dollars in the span of 18 hours based on an agreement that neither side can even agree on the terms of. Here is what the ceasefire was supposed to be. Pakistan brokered a deal between Washington and Tehran built around Iran's own 10-point proposal. That document demands continued Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, the withdrawal of all U.S. combat forces from the Middle East, and the lifting of every primary and secondary sanction on Iran. It also requires compensation for war damages, acceptance of Iranian uranium enrichment, and a binding United Nations Security Council resolution to lock it all in. Trump called the proposal a workable basis on which to negotiate. Iran's Supreme National Security Council called the ceasefire an enduring defeat for Washington and claimed the United States had been forced to accept Iran's framework. Both sides declared victory within the same hour, which should tell you everything about how solid this agreement actually is. But the critical fault line was not the 10-point plan itself. The critical fault line was one word that appeared in Pakistan's announcement and nowhere in Washington's: Lebanon. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who mediated the deal, stated explicitly that the ceasefire includes all fronts of the war, including Lebanon. Iran said the same thing. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted a screenshot of Pakistan's statement on social media and wrote that the ball is in the U.S. court. Hezbollah announced it was halting attacks on Israel in compliance with the truce. And then Israel said no. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the ceasefire does not include Lebanon. Trump confirmed it hours later, telling a reporter that Lebanon was excluded because of Hezbollah. And within hours of that statement, the Israeli Air Force launched the largest coordinated strike on Lebanon since the war began on February 28th. Operation Eternal Darkness. 50 fighter jets dropping 160 munitions across 100 targets in 10 minutes. Not 100 targets over a day, 100 targets in 10 minutes. Strikes hit central Beirut without prior warning, including 5 separate neighborhoods in the city's commercial and coastal core. Associated Press journalists on the ground reported scenes of devastation at one of Beirut's busiest intersections. An airstrike struck a cemetery in the Bekaa Valley during a funeral, killing at least 10 mourners. 3 girls were killed in the coastal town of Adlon, south of Sidon. Hospitals in Beirut were flooded with casualties, and the American University of Beirut Medical Center issued an emergency appeal for blood donations. By the end of the day, Lebanese authorities confirmed at least 254 people dead and 890 wounded, making it the single deadliest day of the 2026 Lebanon war. Israeli military officials told reporters this was not a closing strike, and that operations against Hezbollah would continue until the political leadership says otherwise. Now here is where this ceasefire falls apart entirely. Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, a key figure in the Pakistan-brokered negotiations, issued a statement on Wednesday accusing the United States of violating 3 of Iran's 10 conditions before negotiations even began. Violation 1: Israel's continued and escalated attacks on Lebanon, which Iran and Pakistan say the ceasefire explicitly covers. Violation 2: the entry of a drone into Iranian airspace after the ceasefire was supposed to be in effect. And Violation 3, the Trump administration's public assertion that it will not accept any Iranian uranium enrichment capability as part of a final deal, which directly contradicts point 3 of Iran's proposal. Ghalibaf's statement was not diplomatic. His exact framing was that the deep historical distrust Iran holds toward the United States stems from its repeated violations of all forms of commitments, a pattern that has regrettably been repeated once again. He called bilateral negotiations unreasonable under these conditions, and then Iran responded with the only leverage it has left. The IRGC announced that shipping through the Strait of Hormuz had been halted in response to Israeli attacks on Lebanon. According to marine traffic vessel tracking data, virtually no commercial tanker traffic was moving through the strait by Thursday. Over 400 oil tankers and dozens of LNG carriers remain anchored outside the Gulf waiting for clearance that is not coming. Before the war, between 100 and 120 commercial vessels crossed the strait every single day. On Wednesday, the day the ceasefire was supposed to open it, the total number of transits recorded was 4. Now let me show you what this means in numbers that connect directly to your life. Oil dropped from roughly $112 per barrel to about $95 on the ceasefire announcement, the biggest single-day plunge since 2020. Markets celebrated as stock futures surged across every major exchange. And then within 24 hours, Brent crude climbed back above $98 per barrel, and the spot price for actual physical cargo of Brent oil sat at $124.68, nearly $30 above the futures price. That gap between what traders are betting on and what actual oil costs to physically deliver tells you the market does not believe the ceasefire will hold. The International Energy Agency has warned this crisis could be more severe than the oil shocks of the 1970s. The U.S. Energy Information Administration reported that Brent went from $61 per barrel at the start of 2026 to $118 by the end of March, the largest quarterly price increase on an inflation-adjusted basis in nearly 4 decades. And that was before the ceasefire collapsed. Here's the part that should concern every government watching this play out. The ceasefire has a structural contradiction that cannot be resolved. Iran says Lebanon is included. The United States and Israel say it is not. Both positions are incompatible, and neither side can back down without losing the framework entirely. If Iran accepts that Lebanon is excluded, it abandons Hezbollah, its most important regional ally, and signals to every proxy force in its network that Iranian security guarantees mean nothing when Washington applies pressure. If the United States forces Israel to stop striking Lebanon, it undermines its closest ally in the region and hands Iran a diplomatic victory that validates the entire 10-point proposal. And if Israel continues striking Lebanon while the ceasefire with Iran is technically active, then Iran has a permanent justification to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, because from Tehran's perspective, the deal has already been violated. Those are 3 options, and all 3 of them lead to the same outcome. The ceasefire does not hold. Vice President JD Vance called this a fragile truce from Hungary on Wednesday. He is leading the American delegation to Islamabad for talks starting Saturday, alongside Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Iran's delegation is already arriving in Pakistan, but the Iranian ambassador's statement on the way in was telling. He said the delegation comes despite skepticism of Iranian public opinion due to repeated ceasefire violations by the Israeli regime to sabotage the diplomatic initiative. So here is where we are. Day 41 of this war. A ceasefire announced with celebration and a 15% oil crash. 254 people killed in Lebanon on the same day. The Strait of Hormuz functionally closed again with over 400 tankers anchored and waiting. Oil climbing back toward $100 per barrel less than 24 hours after the deal. Iran accusing the United States of 3 violations. Israel promising more strikes on Lebanon. A negotiation set to begin Saturday in Islamabad between delegations that cannot even agree on what the ceasefire covers. The mainstream media showed you the handshake. They are not showing you the 254 dead in Beirut that came with it. They are not explaining that the strait is still empty. They are not doing the math on a ceasefire where the 2 sides have mutually exclusive interpretations of its most important clause. And they are not telling you that every single day the strait stays closed, Iran spends nothing to keep it shut while the global economy bleeds billions. They are calling this diplomacy. I just showed you what it actually looks like when a ceasefire dies on its first day. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Islamabad talks can save this deal? Or did Operation Eternal Darkness just kill it? Let me know and make sure you are subscribed, because whatever happens Saturday in Pakistan will determine whether this war restarts or the world gets a 2-week window to breathe. Either way, the Strait of Hormuz is still closed, the tankers are still anchored, and the missiles in Lebanon are still falling.